Today I'm going to explain two types of energy that are on the extreme edges of the wavelength of the public consciousness for solar panels. So, in this video here, Undecided with Matt Farrell, he is the head face of, a lot of bringing research projects to, public consumption in these videos. So here he's talking about perovskite and it's little known and all this stuff. So of course all of this has been known about for a long time. It's not actually new. They've just made some recent breakthroughs when it comes to manufacturing perovskite. So I'll give you a little bit of this video and then I'll explain where their limitations in their thinking are.
What if the real future of solar is a material you've probably never heard of? It's called kesterite, and new research suggests that it could match perovskite's efficiency without any toxic lead in the stack. That could mean even cheaper, cleaner, and more efficient after an initial dip. Accelerated aging tests are still on the to-do list, but kesterite already has a reputation.
So they've tried all kinds of things, different stacked layers, and they're obsessed with this concept of working within a single ultimate photovoltaic level without breaking it into separate colors like I've described. How far can they go, they're asking, without doing my further splitting of the energy and the wavelengths? So why, I ask, but okay. Under those principles, let's make these, layered panels that are ultimately conducting on one layer within those layers, so it's still obeying the concept, even though there's different parts to the electron emissions gathering apparatus and layerage. So already you're using layers, so it's silly. But so they've used gold and molybdenum as a backing and increased the efficiency, but raised the price a little.
For stability. But there's one last box to check. It's the make or break for any solar cell, and that's efficiency. It's not just homes and businesses that are space constrained, utilities are too.
Okay, let's get straight to the science here.
Used a computer model to optimize a kesterite device. They tuned the band gap, swapped out stack materials, and dialed in the thickness of each layer.
Yeah, so talking about stacking things differently, okay. That's just software, okay. Now,
Charged hole. If those charges travel to opposite ends of the solar stack, you get electrical current. However, if they meet again, they cancel out as heat instead of electricity.
so here's the principle. They're trying to rip things different directions. You see, this is coming from the principle of, well, not force, just how humans think everything's like gotta be jostled around, like all their laboratory experiments. Okay, so this is silly because you're relying on a process where the materials themselves in their stacks, statically sitting there, have to be so perfectly and meticulously engineered, and as they'll show here, filled in with materials that are cheap after it's being made, and like slather on some paint to fix some gaps. But doesn't that, as I describe it, this seems impressive, right? Except I've seen this my whole life, discussions like this. So he says he's very impatient with the whole process, and he should be. This is ridiculous. You can't pretend that you can spend this long and never have achieved anything, really.
That's recombination, or at least a very simplified version of it. Recombination happens because copper and zinc are so similar.
Okay, copper and zinc are similar. Bits of the materials are swapping in position in their charges or whatever in locations, and it's confusing the electrons and trapping energy. Okay. then you have heat that's building up, and the electricity isn't going where it's supposed to, and then that heat can lead to further, you know, degradation.
That they swap places in the lattice, undermining the crystal structure. That creates deep traps where electrons and holes get stuck long enough to recombine instead of making electricity. Casterate can also have vacancies at atomic sites in the crystal lattice, which is the semiconductor equivalent of a pothole. But the trouble isn't just inside the crystal. At the interface between the casterate and the other layers in the stack, surface defects and poor contact between the layers can trap electrons, block electricity with hydrogen gas. Just a couple of months later, researchers at Shenzhen University in China showed that oxygen could heal defects by entering the crystal lattice.
Now, how could we have gone all the way till now when we reach some magical threshold where instantly all of science is appreciating the basic usages of oxygen and hydrogen? It's like a brain state. As everybody chanted in public schools, we are carbon-based life forms. We will burn our souls for the demons. Like, I don't quite understand the mentality here and the limitations, but it's very baked into culture because, like, here's the other problem he doesn't want to address, but he tiptoes around it. Everybody is obsessed with using sulfuration in multiple ways. In this example, and sulfur breaks down. It's meant to break down. So when you talk about using sulfur or specifically sodium, of course, but also potassium, there's these different things that you wouldn't say, that's going to be my solar panel of the future, because it's not the right material. It's not logical. So they keep running into these retard gaps in their brains where they say, I like sulfur, I'm a demon. And then they can't think anymore and they're again limited. So instead of getting angry about it, we find solutions. So O2H2, that pressurizes everything and gets everything moving as a gas vapor. Simple, cheap, economical, right? How could this have not been known about? It always was. Now this gets me closer to what my solutions are for the whole problem the whole time. Gotta explain it all through here. CBD, yeah, I'm just kidding. Okay. Like right here. Spin coating for CZTS precursor. Okay, they're spinning it as they coat it. So then it's like the energy's like layers like in a graph that's so if you have it spinning, why stop having it spinning once it's a product? What I'm saying is, couldn't one of your layers be using a different principle? Instead of trying to have perfect materials, who cares? If it jostles loose electrons at whatever rate and then the rest won't come loose and they're going to build up heat and destroy everything. Well, how many seconds can you get before everything breaks down? So why couldn't you have a simple squeegee magnetron like spinning rod on each surface, or even like in between the layers of glass on the front of a solar panel or something, and it just comes through, and instead of treating the solar cells like they have to perfectly do what they're supposed to and distribute all those electrons in a giant shipping network that's complicated as hell with a bunch of bottleneck, gates everywhere. And as we know, you have to have perfect communication and road layout and everything in order to have a ton of semis trying to get through an area. And then you get to like a checkpoint and it's just chaos. And that's why they keep saying you can never reach over 1/3 efficiency with single layer cell setup like this. And so I'm like, okay, but that's for output with no external medium interfering to assist. Now, why? Why are we trying to achieve these goals? I don't know. So, with a simple storage battery medium to the panel and a simple magnetic refresh with the blade coming around, which could be on a spindle that uses very little energy, can be very lightweight. It can be mostly made out of certain trapped, gold and other particles sprayed into a photovoltaic like mass of aerogel, so lightweight, and it wouldn't actually be touching anything and dragging. It'd just be so close that it can transfer and rip the energy. Never has anybody discussed that. Okay, so there's that end of it. So
And filling vacancies where sulfur should have been. Think of hydrogen and oxygen like a polish for scratched glass, filling in the imperfections, earth-abundant and non-toxic materials, then adding expensive silver, rare germanium, and toxic cadmium, 14.3% certified efficiency.
So here they put chemicals in general that they say are non-toxic. The first thing that came to mind, because the name of their mineral starts with a K, is vitamin K, and how they talk about how from rhubarb you can get so much energy into your brain and store it as crystals. Okay, so what about vitamin K in this type of application, right? Oh, well, it's extremely volatile, they say. It has to be stored um, away from certain oxygen molecules. And in vitamin K in your brain, see, people's brains are really weak and they're using things like vitamin K and then they don't have the structures there. So then it's causing certain oxygen attachment in their brain and then they're lightheaded and confused. Another thing that's never discussed about vitamin K is how healthy you are, is how well it works in you, how willing you are to be healthy and eat healthy. So if you follow that principle, vitamin K has to be already attached to oxygen particles. But if you had a refresher, so that, say you were creating extra oxygen and hydrogen, like China is starting to do as a side project from their beach, solar farms. Okay, well, if there's a way to take something like vitamin K, this was my thought process, and flush it with gas that's charged with extra electrons past it, and then dump those electrons through another surface that sucks them as they pass by, well, whatever, it's just a solution on solution on solution
Which
here.
is less than 6 points away from that 20% goal that would make kestrite commercially viable. And yes, it still uses a cadmium sulfide buffer layer. This discovery shows that cheap and cheerful materials can deliver meaningful performance gains.
Okay. So let's go to the other extreme that I haven't thought through recently as much. If you were to create, like I'm saying, temporary cell batteries that either gas or another medium like a wand passes over every few seconds or whatever, then it strips the electrons. Then you get no burst surge because each part of the panel is being pie-pieced, spun, free of its electrons evenly at a steady rate, right? And then if there's a higher amount of UV heat coming out of the sun, whichever days, then the thing spins quicker to keep, the cells from reaching critical mass and overheating and exploding or whatever. So in this way, you'd have to be careful because you'd have to have a way to have the whole system go dark if something goes wrong within, a few seconds, hopefully, so you don't blow out anything. Um, on the far end of that's easy to do. I'm just saying. That's just another thing to think about. But so if you want to hold on to the energy for temporary second, well that's probably premier. But let's explore the other route where the energy is so quick to do something instead of hang around that you can take advantage of that. Now, what would that be? What would that be? And first thought in my head. Well, when I was on the trampoline as a child, you have static electricity. So you can, rub yourself around on that nylon mat, right? Just cheapo, any kind of nylon. And so much static electricity builds up in your body that the person standing on the ground, right, you zap them on the nose or finger and they scream a lot and it hurts really bad. Now, everybody treats that like it's nothing, even though it's everything. I said with static electricity special cloth actually made for static cling, and then with like a spinning wand that's disturbing the materials across each other or whatever surface that generates it, you can generate far more energy from static electricity than it takes to remove it from the surface, however often, in whatever manner. That's never been explored. I did a video on that. Where's research into that? So, if we take that principle, how could we apply it is the question, so that there isn't, factories with big spinning, no matter how light or efficient, big spinning rods moving materials at whatever size, generating electricity with the physical friction, right? That's always going to be expensive, you would say, because of the necessary movement. But what if you put both of these layers together? What if on one side your wand is basically activating the opposite effect. So the battery storage for several seconds effect and then the wand going over it, those are the two extremes on either side. So when you think about it, you have to have both extremes and in between all being addressed simultaneously, as like a delicious sandwich, as was described in a different video, before you're going to get anywhere.
What makes this latest Kestrel record even more exciting is that it was achieved using a faster, cheaper production method. Because as much as efficiency matters, manufacturing costs are...
So, now I just did a video about how all of this is pretty silly because using one-way mirroring and concentration of the light into lasers that hit a pipe along the desert, and then you have all that photovoltaic energy going at superheated temperatures through the sandpipe, through the desert to the ocean shore, and then you deal with the energy there. That's ancient Egyptian style. So that wasn't even on the table for some reason for everybody. And I say it's because they're obsessed with getting the electrons into wires for some reason and circuits and having all these computer systems breaking it up, and it gets confusing and complex. It's this obsession with humanity of calculation of electrons and everything. And it's a downfall. It's a limited thinking strategy. So already they admit that you can move gas through. So imagine a multi-step solution that's taking everything I'm saying and everything I have said Like you could use other forms of gases, or temporary states of, like I said, metal gases that would flush through and then hit a zone where they would build up and then release the electrons. Like, how I was talking about coinage generation, like Stormlight Archive, where the coins would be made, as explained in the book, in the middle of thunderstorms, right? Um, and it's all magic in the book. They didn't want to get into the science of it that everybody's been discussing forever. But what about refining that down so you don't have to have that blast of extreme lightning, which I've discussed? But what about just taking the sun and having materials stacked so that they get itchy from the sun? That's a feeling I've been getting over the years, is there's more UV rays in the sun, combating the holes in the atmosphere, trying to fill them in certain frequencies. So that itchy feeling, couldn't you take that frenetic itchy feeling that builds up in my skin? Couldn't you have a material that wipes it, like the human sweat system inside of the skin, um, the lymph system? What I'm saying is, my body and hopefully other people's bodies are getting static electricity off of the sun, and I get energized for a certain amount of period of time. Um, and that's considered the worst thing to the degenerate old system. They didn't want people getting free energy from the sun, even directly into their skin. They want everything so toxic that your skin cells weren't functioning right. And that's what made solar cells so difficult to research under heavy radiation from the Department of Energy being a bunch of asshole weirdos.
Often the deciding factor for whether a solar cell will ever reach the mass market.
So, my thinking is, you got that itchy feeling. You got something, wicking it free, gas or some other solution. Um, you've got the concept of certain types of gas collecting on thin wafer receiver areas for a certain amount of time off of the panels, and then they could be extracted, and then those coinages that have the built up layers on them, kind of like in slow motion crystal growth versus laboratory speed growth. You're trying to achieve the opposite, and then you just take the crystal layer mesh and use it for other, valuable electrical conduction and storage and creasel. Like, you take it to the next level, and the ones that have naturally grown correctly and the most efficiently, as nature will find new patterns. I'm trying to describe how this all works. So you just have to keep experimenting and getting it right, and then eventually you get the chrysalis like coinage of ideal mixed energy focalization, you would call it, through the coinage, so that you can get lightning and other materials of high light density to pass through it without burning it out immediately. But then you can still photovoltaically rip some of the energy and concentrate the rest of the remaining photons into not controlling them, just directing them, bouncing them. Like, interesting is materials that reach a certain threshold and then ionize, because there are then other layers that resist for a certain amount of time when lightning hits. All of these things I'm trying to describe are things that we need to achieve on the grander scale we're thinking way too small here with these solar cells. Um, and my towers really are the solution, so I'm going to keep pushing it.
In previous years, the best Kestrate films were made by sputtering, which sounds messy, but it's using plasma hot gas to precisely deposit thin layers in a vacuum.
Now, this is what I was saying. That would be happening kind of live in the moment. So that the buildup of energy in the cells for a few seconds, then you'd have the wand swing around, which would cause a disturbance, which would cause a gas reaction trough spinning, result off of the wand. So then you get everything at once and you kind of build off of all of the different things together. And then you could still stack all of this and have energy being collected there at the site for a certain percentage, and then send the rest through on whatever wavelengths right on through for my actual, so what I'm saying is you cool the energy somewhat, different practices, then the sun energy continues on and gets sandwiched through into a laser beam that would shoot to a unifying tunnel of all the hot energy with a one-way mirroring, and it would go and be processed somewhere. So it's like you're keeping it as photons because it can just keep bouncing forever. And if the surfaces are keeping it bouncing correctly without loss, there's not much loss. So I'm trying to stack these technologies till we get to the point where there's 100% efficiency, and that's what you have to do. I was never saying, we'll fully abandon all this other stuff and all these other layers that come into being. These are layers of technology that, when worked together, the full sandwich, you got to have all of the ingredients on that sandwich. You got to have pickled artichoke hearts and cucumbers. You gotta get decadent. Now I could get into a discussion of how they're using low quality vinegar from dubious bacterial sources. Just like I could get into often how they're making these solar cells with dubious materials from dubious sources. But that's something I've already talked about a lot.
Energetic particles strike a target, causing a single atom to be removed at a time. These atoms eventually deposit on the surface to be coated, and that's not cheap or easy to do. Solution-based methods are 10 times cheaper and 5
CZT, NZT.
times faster than sputtering. However, high defect levels in kestrates made with solution-based techniques made the method, well, hardly the solution. Until now. The current kestrate record holder, that solar cell that boosted to the 14.3% efficiency with a couple of simple additives, it was built layer by layer using a solution technique called doctor blading, which sounds like a name of a new TV drama, but it also sounds very pricey. It's actually the same as slathering too much icing on a cake, then wiping off the excess to a fixed thickness. It's simple, quick, and low energy. It's a really common technique in manufacturing, including for thin film semiconductors. In other words, it's the kind of approach that could help bring kestrate to commercialization. So when will kestrate make it out of the lab? Well, Chingbo Meng, who led the team behind the current record, told Chemistry World in late 2025 that he sees kestrate crossing the 20% threshold within 5 years.
But why? How? Because somebody will come up with something that'll make it happen. I mean, I had a couple of more thoughts on crystal formation for kesterite that are bouncing around in my head, but the information's getting scattered in there and I'm not thinking too clearly. But I just want to do this video and state that there is a multi-stacked solution to this. Now, here was another one I wanted to bring up while I was on the topic that I might not have brought up years ago in different videos. Actually audio scrubbing. You have to realize sound, right, is electrons moving. So another layer to this is the pickup of the sound of the electrons of the light data. Like if you can create a subsurface scattering with either a wand or, I mean, if you think about like a clear polymer base drum skin speaker that's also stacking layers of sunlight. Now, what materials could you have on the stretched drum skin that sunlight hitting it could rip such dense sound, like network of electrons into that sound? Um, I'll give you a couple hints. You know how like you hear different stars screaming at each other, right? Star scream. So if you take the frequency that the sun is screaming back out in like a magnetic loop at the stars and spinning with its planets, like I said, like a corkscrew, more like a drill bit through space, maintaining its parameters as good as it can. So, um, whew, back poppies. That frequency of sound off of the sun, it echoing and reverberating in a echo box you create. Um, so you would rip the light into however other things, but this to say this was one layer and a whole cake all the way down, getting into energy. So the sound layer um could be perform its job in different ways. You could have a sound layer that's all the way up at the top nearly, so that the raw sunlight is hitting it, and then it's transmitting its signal of sound through other layers magnetically to a receiver layer that's all, fluxing with the incoming sound and scattering the electrons that could be wiped or flushed or whatever. So, let's see what else. Of course, you've got the straight up concept that you could reach certain energy thresholds and then it would initiate into sound. So when the battery is full, then instead of having a just a wand going around, you would have a physical micro reaction of shuddering, like when you're ill, like I always feel as I burn off every known bacteria that other bodies around me don't notice. My sensitivity to sickness is super high, and I have to be much healthier than other people in order to function at all. It's not that I'm immune deficient, and it's not that I'm an over immune system. I notice everything and all the bacteria that everybody else ignores that's aging them. That's why I'm not aging normally. That's why my brain is clear enough over all these years and decades to keep expanding and expounding upon these topics. So, um, there's a perfect balance here. Like when you're shivering, even though the sun is hot and cooking you. But that would indicate, when you think about it that way, that there's nitrate poisoning in my cells that's assisting the sodium to hold, while shaking around with it, the uranium from all the murderers that are trying to kill me, trying to cook it into me as I try to warble my cells freely to release all data and refresh and remove PTSD from all the murder cops. So maybe we should take a look at what the murder cops specialized in with their special light bars on their cars with strange flashing patterns of sulfur and uranium and other substances illegal, and how far they got their science to bake fear and degeneracy into humanity and fester bacterial growth through their light arrays. Just like how I went down to watch the fireworks recently, and the very opposite was happening. And society has to face up to this. That I went down there, cops were banned this year fully, no cop cars allowed, no cops in volunteer fire trucks either, not allowed. So I heard nothing, I saw nothing. Everything was great, right? Except then different members of the crowd who were cops sympathizers, part of the bully system, started talking louder and louder, and their brains got angrier and angrier, and they started declaring they were terrorists directly and challenging the crowd around them while the fireworks were going, while children couldn't notice and were happy and everything. And it just happened to be right near where I was. Now, I have so much attention on me at this point because the degenerates have focused too hard. So now I have other people nearby who are aware of why the degenerates are specifically saying it because I'm there and are acknowledging that I'm there finally. So that's good. So if you take these two extreme energies of society, these polarizations where you have me on one extreme of freedom and them on the other extreme of terrorism, well, the great social experiment of America has been, how can we ignore these factions on the extreme edges and let them torture each other while we sit around as bloated retards and hope that somehow it'll all shake out and work out magically? Well, it hasn't, and people have to actually address this more and more fully so that, like, your brains aren't working right. You can't make the materials to have clean energy because there's people in your community saying what they're saying, pushing bad energy, pushing that uranium fixation that destroyed America in the 1900s. And even a little in the 1800s, while they pretend it didn't yet. So, my point is, then there was these fireworks. There was a new firework, like I described, that used stacked reaction layers. That was super expensive and experimental. That looked like, different morphing planetoids. And I've seen them over the years from different years happening early. Like fireworks will have multiple stages from different years that you can watch. And the crowd will see it too. Some years. Sometimes half the crowd will leave and I'll sit there and new fireworks will start. And in Emmett, there's actually 2 fireworks displays. And the one that's unofficial but official on the other side of the park, it's like very valid and it goes for like an hour and a half or 2 hours of nonstop fireworks, but they don't have certain of the big experimental new ones. So it's, slightly less fun. But if you really want to soak in fireworks for hours, Emmett is the place to do it. Wow. It's gotten better and better over the decades as people push back against the complete pedophile, rapist, murderer, drug organization feeling that was Emmett. And as soon as that firework went off, man, all the degenerates in the crowd were just all like, "Oh, I gotta kill someone. Oh, instant activations." So what I'm saying is, what you've all been doing is hiding the fact that there's retards out there just waiting for clean energy to hit a certain threshold from solar panels that not have sulfides producing them. And the energy's too clean, and they'll start squirming around in their skin like they're a degenerate druggie. And their drug of choice was bad energy, so they didn't need anything else because they're just negative assholes that want to terrorize. Duh. So the real thing holding everybody back is kowtowing and allowing that level of terrorism that people say, well, I don't like that type of energy. Find a different one that pleases me more. That's what we're dealing with. It's not patents so certain companies can stay rich. It's all the degenerative little people screaming with a mass consciousness of bacterial filthiness that everything needs to be made with gaps in it in the energy so that they can chuff along in the death with their bacteria and not die from the electricity. And they need everybody to have degenerative electricity like them so that their degenerative thoughts and their sulfur bladders can hop right out from the radio signals from their TV coming right off of the screen, especially in the 1900s with all that infinite static electricity. Static electricity. Static electricity. As if it's generating at people and wounding them. But what if that static electricity cling, like I said here, could be used to generate electricity in solar panels? What if everything I'm describing was carefully thought through in the late 1800s? All materials were examined, all possibilities were known and quantified then, even though they didn't have micro manufacturing to produce anything much. Just experiment with expensive experiments. But everything was known. Everything. And then they create a system that is purposely avoiding, because it's already discovered all known methods of energy generation for solar panels. And it's just the signal that, no, you gotta use sulfur. It's too clean now, I don't like it. That's it. That's all they're obsessed with. So now they're talking about using molybdenum with sulfur, which molybdenum breaks down sulfur and destroys the components. They're obsessed with sulfur.
The problem is, I'm impatient, like right now. So I try to remember that the first solar panels were installed on a New York City rooftop in 1884, made of selenium with a thin coating of gold.
Now, how much you want to bet the second this happened, magic bacterial radiation retard populaces started screaming, "Gold! I have urine to that gold. I need the feelings that my bacteria is hiding the pain of my sins." That's the truth of modern science being held back.
They worked, but with an efficiency of just 1 to 2%. It wasn't until 1954 that Bell Laboratories rolled out the silicon solar cell.
Now, silicon had to evolve into the universe so it could be manufactured easier. You can believe that or not. Certain materials in the polymers are appearing, evolving. Plants are evolving polymers because humanity was never going to get anywhere. They were just going to die off. Everything had been decided, everything had been manufactured with an end goal that by the year 2000, all humanity would be failing and on its last legs with cancer. Completely controlled, with infinite vaccines that turn them all into automatons with marching orders. And everybody felt the weight of that more recently and said, okay, we have to admit that's what the whole scheme was. From degenerates who aren't better than anybody else, they just kept pushing their terrorist ideals. It's absurd. I was just watching where they talk about how Sami Zayn's the bad guy in wrestling because he wants to sit on his laurels and not defend the belt. As if that's a deciding factor that makes him the bad guy in the current narrative. As, again, as I said in that world too, I'm not doing bad versus good because that's too obvious and can be manipulated in everybody's heads. There's these hard structures of what's bad or good. So from now on, WWE is going to be telling stories of characters and what their personality traits are. And you decide if they're flaws or strengths as they discuss things, and it's all interlaced and nuanced. So that the truth is, degenerates, all they have is push. They are hustling in their own way, just degeneratively. The bacteria in them is hustling, trying to find ways to fester and rot and get other bacteria through slavery to fix the problem, clean the area, do things. And that's their whole solution of humanity through the hospital system. And just get other bacteria that's evolving or something, just be slaves and just do it all. And we can just be filthy cows. So, this pervasiveness of failing to do things correctly gets all the way into the solar panel industry because it needs to. These degenerates need to run the energy industry. And what if you looked at it from the other way around? You have these leaders of these supposed countries that everybody was saying were mass murderers like Putin and these other people. Then you get into the future and there's some internet. Oh no, it turns out that wasn't Putin, that was everybody else. Oh, we're so wrong. Oops. Oh, turns out the guy in the modern era in China, he wasn't killing everybody. It was other people. Wouldn't you know it? The media got it wrong. Oops. So, if they can get that wrong and spread misinformation about every country, that it's real bad, even as that real bad fell away and the CIA lost control, then you start to reach this conclusion that the degenerative trailer park retards are a lot more sinister and festering than you give them credit for. And they'll get into all walks of life. I mean, look at the holy books of any land, of any religion, of any timescape. What do they say? Oh, we let the degenerates fester, and now they're in our government magically. Now they're in our buildings. We don't even know how they got in there. They're taking over. They're killing everybody. Oh, oops. We shouldn't have let those trailer parks be that way. Too late. We just said they that they must just be, down on their luck instead of just big murderers. Everything I'm describing, the sound the degenerates put off with their degenerative police cars versus the regular ones, all of it is attuned to destroy energy and breed cancer. And those holes and cells are their calling card, are their access to black hole energy radiation of the great outdoors of outer space. They're trying to make everybody enjoy the great outdoors. But it's just a little too far out there, far out. Too far out.
Achieving 6% efficiency, and it took another 30 years until the...
So right then in 1985, everybody talks about this, the great moment, these people, look how sexy they are, the stupid things they said. Then within another 5 years, into the mid to late 90s, manufacturing got underway for super cheap. We were able to get cheap solar panels and get water from our well, a little trickle. Because it's still not that efficient for raw transfer into a pump to pull water. But it was pretty cool to have that by, 99 or 2000. Anybody could draw a little bit of water with a couple solar panels, just two.
University of New South Wales made a solar cell with 20% efficiency in 1985. Kestrel is still in its early days. Most of the work happening now sits at a NASA Technological Readiness Level, or TRL, of around a 3 or 4.
Yeah, so like I described, when you get everything working together correctly, suddenly the research is the development because you start getting usable concepts, but then you start, snowballing and you get new breakthroughs through my stacked arrangement. And I haven't even discussed that everything I'm describing, the audio ripping of electrons into batteries and storage and wires, audio works really good for the black light spectrum. And so if you want to pull color black light, right, from the medium, because I've only discussed the wavelengths on the positive side of the scale. What about the fact that our sun is actually a black hole, and outside of this thin plane that we're on, a pizza, Everything else is a giant black maelstrom of energy being ripped through time space from other black hole suns that are communicating like giant audio wafer ports that are bulging and compressing and sending data to each other and holding the shape of everything together. I haven't said it like that before. Now, this black light, think about little whirring tape decks on the solar level. Energy comes in, it's audio rip and spun and dispersed through or past or reverberated out of the material to the next layer or receiving medium. And this whole black light frequency of ripping sound light is actually really valid. It's really dense. It's going to be used for sensor array network systems within new stacked gas computing matrices for servers in the future. I guess I'm pretty much reaching the end of all my information. I've really been spouting it out.
Which is the stage where technology proves itself in the lab and early prototypes start to look like a real device. Perovskites were in the same spot about 16 years ago. We've watched them grow up in real time, climbing from those first lab experiments to something around a TRL of 8 with
Like, that's ridiculous. The whole effort of all humanity, and they're slowly exploring each option that slowly. Doesn't that seem kind of rigged and like on a timeline that's a little namby-pamby? Wouldn't you say a little limping along? I'd say so. So I think I've given people some thoughts. Now, I always say these materials, you get infinite gains if you take it from certain, like, beats and other things. Like I talked about, blacklight panels originally for dispersing sound, color light into the human form with these blacklight panel strips from black radish and other materials from nature, from growing things. And it really works good. It really healed me good. It burnt my passages clean and killed off the bacteria, which is obviously hiding in the black light wavelengths from outer space. So, what we really have to tap into here is the collection of that black light and the fact that it's already inverting the energy of the sun, the other energy, and it's like push pulling. The particles coming in from the sun aren't just stabbing, they're also retracting and pulling as the sun is a live interaction with the earth. It really is. You sit there for 8 minutes and you become a live connection to that sun. You are actually having particles of your cell, or whatever you want to call it, of your materials, being interfaced with that sun. The sun is taking things from your body, measuring them, examining them, simply from the chaotic power of its structure. It's not doing it, you would say, with direct intent of mental concentration from our point of view, but yet it's still achieving a chemical analyzation of everything happening on the planet Earth and creating solutions for the overabundance of toxic substances that humans promote. So those are just things that you need to think about. Yeah, I guess that's all of my data. See you next time.